My wife of 6 years said, "I'm not attracted to you anymore. I need an alpha." I replied, "I understand." Then I accepted the promotion she wanted her new alpha boyfriend to get at our company. When she saw me in the corner office, her face went pale as she realized I was now her new boss. You ever have one of those conversations where you can literally feel your life splitting into a before and after moment, like some kind of depressing movie montage? Yeah, that was me on a random Tuesday evening, sitting on my own couch, the one I'd helped pick out at IKEA 3 years ago during what I thought was a building our future together trip, but was apparently just furniture shopping with a temporary roommate. My wife of 6 years, Lydia, was standing in front of me doing that thing where she wouldn't quite make eye contact, like she was rehearsing lines for a community theater production of How to Dump Your Husband without feeling too guilty about it. She had that look, you know the one, where someone's trying really hard to seem compassionate while simultaneously destroying your entire existence. It's like watching someone apologize while they're actively running over your dog. Twice. "Mason," she started, and I already knew from the tone that this wasn't going to be about whose turn it was to take out the trash. "We need to talk." For words. For simple words that have probably ended more relationships than infidelity, financial ruin, and differing opinions about pineapple on pizza combined. I set down my beer, a locally crafted IPA that I'd never get to finish because apparently the universe decided I needed emotional trauma instead of a mild buzz, and gave her my full attention. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she continued, pacing back and forth in front of our coffee table like a lawyer delivering closing arguments. "And I think we've grown apart." Grown apart? That's rich. We lived in the same 1,500 square foot house, shared the same bed, and had a joint checking account. How much more together could we possibly be? But I didn't say that. Instead, I just nodded, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I could feel where this was heading, like watching a car crash happen in slow motion. "I love you, Mason," she said, and there it was, the conjunction I'd been waiting for. The but was coming. I could feel it in my bones like old people feel rain. "But I'm not in love with you anymore." I waited. There was more. There's always more. You're not an alpha." I blinked. Once. Twice. Processed that sentence like my brain was a computer trying to run software from 1997. "Not an alpha?" I repeated, genuinely confused. "What am I, a beta version? A lab experiment? Do I need a software update?" She didn't laugh. Lydia never appreciated my humor when she was in full dramatic mode. "I'm serious, Mason. I need someone who's more commanding, more decisive. Someone with ambition, you know? Someone who takes charge and makes things happen." Translation: someone who talks louder in meetings and makes a big show of ordering wine at restaurants. Someone who probably wears too much cologne and refers to himself in the third person. I could practically see the Pinterest board in her mind labeled "My Dream Alpha Male," with pictures of guys in suits standing on mountains, looking pensively at the horizon. "I see," I said calmly, which apparently wasn't the reaction she expected. She looked almost disappointed that I wasn't begging or crying or demanding couples therapy. "And I assumed this newfound understanding of your alpha requirements didn't just come from a podcast you listened to while meal prepping?" She shifted uncomfortably, and that's when I knew. There was someone else. Of course there was. People don't usually blow up their marriages over abstract concepts. They do it because they think they found something better. "There's someone else, isn't there?" I asked, not accusatory, just stating a fact like I was commenting on the weather. Lydia had the decency to look slightly ashamed for about half a second before her face hardened into defensive mode. "His name is Brandon," she said, like she was introducing me to her new rescue dog. He's everything you're not, Mason. He's confident, driven, charismatic." "Brandon," I interrupted, the name clicking into place like a puzzle piece I didn't want to find. "Brandon Mitchells? From work." Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. Brandon freaking Mitchells. The guy from sales who wore shirts so tight you could count his ribs, who laughed at his own jokes like they were the funniest things ever uttered in human history, and who had once tried to explain to me, as senior systems engineer, how computers worked. That Brandon. I almost laughed. Almost. Because in that moment, sitting there on my IKEA couch while my wife told me she was trading me in for a human protein shake with a corporate credit card, I had a moment of absolute clarity. The kind of clarity that probably comes right before people make terrible decisions or brilliant ones, and you don't know which until it's too late. Well, I said, standing up and grabbing my beer. I appreciate your honesty, Lydia. Really, I do. She looked confused, like she'd expected tears or anger, or at least some kind of fight. That's it. You're just okay with this. I took a long sip of my IPA, savoring it because this was definitely turning into a multiple beer kind of night. I'm not okay with it, I clarified. But I understand. You want an alpha. You think Brandon is an alpha. Who am I to stand in the way of true love and poor decision-making? You're being sarcastic, she accused. I'm being realistic, I corrected. You've clearly made up your mind. You've already got the replacement picked out. Probably been test driving him for a while now, if I had to guess. Her face flushed, confirming my suspicion. So yeah, I understand. I understand perfectly. Mason, don't be like this. Like what? Calm. Rational. Not making a scene. I headed toward the kitchen, mainly because I needed another beer and some distance. Sorry if my non-alpha response isn't dramatic enough for you. I'll try to cry into my pillow later to make it more cinematic. She followed me, her heels clicking on our hardwood floors. Floors I'd helped install last summer during what I'd foolishly thought was us investing in our home. I didn't want it to be like this, she said, and she actually sounded genuine for a moment. Nobody ever does, I replied, opening the fridge. But here we are. You want Brandon, the alpha male extraordinaire. I want someone who doesn't rate their partner on a Greek letter system. I'd say we're at an impasse. I turned to face her, beer in hand, and realized something that would have devastated me an hour ago, but now just felt like cold, hard fact. I didn't even feel that sad. Disappointed? Sure. Annoyed? Absolutely. But heartbroken? Not really. Maybe I'd known this was coming on some subconscious level, or maybe I'd already emotionally checked out of a marriage that apparently had an expiration date I wasn't aware of. I'll sleep in the guest room, I said. We can figure out the details later. Enjoy your alpha. And with that, I walked away from my wife of 6 years, my almost empty beer, and whatever illusion I'd been living under that we were actually happy. Behind me, I heard her say something else, but I wasn't listening anymore. Because here's the thing about being called not an alpha. It stings for about 5 minutes until you realize it's coming from someone who thinks Brandon Mitchells is the pinnacle of masculinity. And once you realize that, it stops being an insult and starts being comedy gold. I just didn't know yet how funny the punchline was going to be. Let me paint you a picture of Brandon Mitchells, the man who apparently represented everything my wife thought I lacked. The human embodiment of what happens when someone watches too many motivational videos on YouTube and decides that's a personality. Brandon was loud. Not just regular loud, but that specific brand of loud that makes you wonder if the person has ever had an internal thought they didn't immediately broadcast to everyone within a 50-foot radius. He laughed at volumes that could probably be used to measure earthquakes, and he had this habit of clapping people on the back like he was trying to dislodge food from their esophagus. Every conversation with Brandon felt like being trapped in a car commercial where the announcer is way too excited about cup holders. We all worked at Titan Edge Engineering, a mid-sized tech firm that specialized in infrastructure solutions for corporations that wanted to sound innovative without actually being innovative. It was the kind of place where people used words like synergy and paradigm shift in meetings without a trace of irony, and where the break room coffee was both too strong and too weak simultaneously, which I'm pretty sure violated several laws of physics. I was a senior systems engineer, which is corporate speak for the guy who actually makes everything work while everyone else takes credit for it. I'd been there for 8 years, quietly fixing problems, streamlining processes, and making sure our clients didn't experience catastrophic failures that would make the evening news. I was the digital plumber. Basically, nobody noticed me until something broke, and then suddenly I was everyone's best friend. Lydia worked in project management, coordinating teams and timelines, and pretending that color-coded spreadsheets could solve any problem. She was good at her job, I'll give her that. Organized, efficient, professional. I'd actually been proud of her, which in retrospect feels like the emotional equivalent of investing in Blockbuster stock in 2010. And then there was Brandon, who worked in sales and strutted through the office like he was perpetually walking onto a yacht he didn't own. His title was Senior Business Development Executive, which was a fancy way of saying he took clients to expensive lunches and somehow convinced them to buy things they didn't need. He was good at it, too, because Brandon had mastered the art of confidence over competence, the American dream, really. The man was physically incapable of wearing a shirt that didn't have a designer logo visible from space. Ralph Lauren, Hugo Boss, Armani. His wardrobe was like a billboard for overpriced cotton. His hair was always perfectly styled with enough product to create a small environmental hazard, and he wore cologne like he was trying to ward off vampires. You could tell when Brandon had been in the elevator because the scent lingered like a particularly aggressive ghost. But here's the thing about Brandon that drove me absolutely insane. He wasn't actually good at anything except seeming good at things. He was a human PowerPoint presentation, big fonts, flashy transitions, inspiring stock photos of people climbing mountains, and absolutely zero substance when you actually read the content. He'd mastered the art of corporate theater, knowing exactly when to nod thoughtfully in meetings, when to throw around buzzwords like leverage and disrupt, and when to take credit for other people's work. I'd watched him do it for years. He'd swoop into a project at the last minute, make some obvious suggestion that everyone had already thought of, and then act like he'd just invented the wheel during the presentation to upper management. And it worked. People ate it up because Brandon understood something I'd been too naive to grasp. In corporate America, perception is often more valuable than reality. My coworker Derek, a fellow engineer who'd been at Titan Edge even longer than me, once described Brandon as what would happen if a motivational poster and a used car salesman had a baby, and that baby went to a seminar about alpha male energy. It was the most accurate description I'd ever heard. The office dynamics were exactly what you'd expect from a place where engineers, project managers, and salespeople had to coexist. We engineers huddled in our corner with our monitors and our coffee and our inside jokes about code. Project management floated between departments, trying to keep everyone on schedule while slowly dying inside. And sales held court in their section with their standing desks and their protein shakes and their conversations about quarterly targets that somehow always turned into discussions about their weekend golf games. Brandon ruled the sales floor like a discount Tony Stark, holding court at his desk, which he'd customized with a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and dispensing wisdom to the younger sales associates who hung on his every word like he was Yoda instead of just another guy who peaked in college. I tried to avoid him when possible, which wasn't hard because our departments rarely overlapped. When we did interact, usually in company-wide meetings or at the occasional forced social event, I kept it professional and brief. He probably thought I was intimidated by him. I wasn't. I was just conserving energy for things that actually mattered, like making sure our database architecture didn't collapse or figuring out why Carol from accounting kept accidentally deleting her own files. But everything changed about 3 weeks before Lydia dropped her "You're not an alpha" bomb on me. That's when the company announced a new position opening up, Director of Strategic Integration. It was one of those roles that sounds made up because it kind of is, but it came with real power. Overseeing how all our departments work together, streamlining processes, and basically being the bridge between the technical side and the business side of the company. It reported directly to Mr. Reynolds, our senior VP, and came with a substantial raise, a corner office, and actual influence over company direction. The announcement hit the internal email system on a Monday morning, and I watched the entire office collectively perk up like prairie dogs spotting a predator. Suddenly, everyone was very interested in strategic integration, despite the fact that half of them probably couldn't define what that meant if their lives depended on it. I'll admit, I was intrigued. It was exactly the kind of role that played to my strengths. I understood how the technical systems worked. I'd been there long enough to know where all the inefficiencies were, and I actually gave a damn about making things better rather than just making things look better. But I also knew how these things typically went. Positions like that usually went to people like Brandon, people who interviewed well, who had the right handshake, who could charm the decision-makers over drinks. Lydia, though, was absolutely thrilled. Not for me, obviously. For Brandon. I started noticing them having more project discussions that required closed doors and hushed voices. She'd come home talking about how Brandon was definitely going to get the director position and how he was exactly what the company needs. She showed me his draft proposal on her laptop one evening, beaming with pride like she was showing off a kindergartner's finger painting. "Isn't it brilliant?" she asked, pointing at a section that basically said, "We should do things better and more efficiently in 10 different ways without actually explaining how. It's certainly confident, I replied, which was the most diplomatic thing I could manage. What I didn't tell her was that I'd spotted at least 3 major technical errors in his proposal, including a suggestion that would have literally crashed our entire client management system. The man wanted to optimize server response times by reducing redundancy protocols, which is like saying you want to make your car faster by removing the brakes. I also didn't mention that several people in upper management had started quietly asking me questions about integration challenges and system architecture, or that Mr. Reynolds had pulled me aside after a meeting and asked if I'd ever considered moving into a leadership role. Because here's what Lydia didn't understand about being an alpha. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It just quietly makes things work while everyone else is busy making noise. And Brandon? Brandon was all noise. The thing about watching your life implode in slow motion is that you get a weird kind of clarity. It's like when you're watching a horror movie and you can see the killer hiding behind the door, but the character on screen is completely oblivious. Except in this version, I was both the audience and the person about to get stabbed, and honestly, I was more curious than scared about how this was all going to play out. It was 2 days after Lydia's "You're not an alpha" speech, and we'd fallen into this bizarre routine of pretending everything was normal while simultaneously knowing that our marriage had the structural integrity of a house of cards in a windstorm. She'd sleep in our bedroom. I'd taken up residence in the guest room, and we'd pass each other in the kitchen making coffee like two strangers at a hotel continental breakfast who were trying really hard not to make eye contact. I went to work, did my job, fixed problems, attended meetings where people said things like circle back and touch base without actually committing to doing anything. You know, normal corporate existence. But then something interesting happened. Mr. Reynolds called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. James Reynolds was one of those rare executives who'd actually worked his way up from the technical side, which meant he understood that fancy presentations meant jack squat if the underlying systems didn't work. He was in his late 50s, had gray hair that he didn't bother dyeing, and wore suits that looked expensive but not flashy. The man exuded competence, which is probably why he'd made it to senior VP, while people like Brandon were still playing dress-up in the sales department. "Mason," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Thanks for making time." Like I was going to say no to the senior VP. "Of course. What can I help you with?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of look that made me feel like I was being x-rayed for competence. "I wanted to talk to you about the Director of Strategic Integration position." My heart did this weird jump skip thing that I tried to keep off my face. "Okay. I've been reviewing the applications we've received. Some interesting candidates." He paused, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. "Brandon Mitchells has certainly made his interest known. Very enthusiastic proposal." "Brandon's definitely enthusiastic," I agreed, keeping my tone neutral. "Enthusiasm is one of his core competencies." Reynolds cracked a small smile. "Diplomatic. That's good. But between you and me, Mason, enthusiasm doesn't fix broken integration protocols. It doesn't prevent system failures. And it definitely doesn't understand the technical infrastructure that holds this entire company together." I waited. This felt like it was going somewhere, and I'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the best thing to do in a conversation is shut up and let the other person get where they're going. "You've been here 8 years," he continued. "In that time, you've handled every major crisis we've had with minimal drama and maximum efficiency. When the Peterson account nearly collapsed because of that database migration disaster, you fixed it in 72 hours. When we almost lost the Friedman contract because our systems couldn't handle their integration requirements, you rebuilt the entire architecture in 2 weeks. You don't make a lot of noise, Mason, but you get things done. And that's exactly what this role needs." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely meaning it. "I'm not blowing smoke up your ass," Reynolds said bluntly. "I'm offering you the position, if you want it." And there it was. The thing I'd been half hoping for and half dreading because I knew what it would mean. Taking this job would be professional suicide for Brandon's chances. It would embarrass Lydia, who'd been basically running a PR campaign for her new boyfriend. It would shift the entire power dynamic at Titan Edge in ways that would make people uncomfortable. It would also be absolutely hilarious. "Can I think about it?" I asked, even though I already knew my answer. "Take the weekend," Reynolds said. "But I need to know by Monday morning." We're planning to announce the new director first thing, and I'd prefer it to be you." I left his office feeling like I'd just been handed the nuclear codes and a post-it note that said, "Have fun." The smart, mature thing to do would have been to call Lydia, tell her about the offer, maybe even discuss what it would mean for our situation. We were still technically married, after all, even if that marriage was currently being held together by nothing but shared mortgage payments and muscle memory. But I didn't call her. Instead, I went back to my desk, pulled up Brandon's proposal that Lydia had so helpfully shared with me, and read through it again with fresh eyes. It was even worse than I remembered. He wanted to implement a revolutionary cross-platform synergy model that would basically require us to rebuild our entire infrastructure using buzzwords and hope. There was a section about leveraging AI-driven solutions that made it clear he thought AI was some kind of magic wand you could wave at problems. And my personal favorite, a timeline that suggested we could overhaul 8 years of established systems in 6 months with the right leadership and vision. It was the corporate equivalent of a toddler's drawing of a spaceship, adorable in its ambition, completely divorced from reality, and destined to explode if anyone actually tried to build it. That evening, Lydia came home practically glowing. She'd been out with Brandon. She didn't even pretend otherwise anymore. And she had that excited energy of someone who thought they were winning at life. "Brandon's feeling really good about the director position," she announced, pouring herself a glass of wine. "He said Mr. Reynolds seemed really impressed during their meeting." "That's great," I said, microwaving leftover Chinese food because cooking felt like too much effort for my current existence. "You know what he told me?" She didn't wait for me to answer. "He said once he gets the promotion, he's going to completely restructure how the technical and business sides communicate. Finally bring some real leadership to the company." "Restructure," I repeated. Interesting choice of words. He's got vision, Mason. That's what you never understood. Sometimes you need someone who can see the big picture instead of just getting lost in the technical details. I wanted to point out that technical details were literally what kept the company from collapsing into a smoking crater of failed systems and angry clients. I wanted to mention that vision without execution was just daydreaming with a business degree. But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and said, "You're probably right." She looked almost disappointed that I wasn't arguing. "You're being weird." "I'm being realistic," I corrected. "You've clearly moved on. Brandon's your guy now. I hope it works out for you both." "God, you're so passive," she muttered, shaking her head. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. No fire, no ambition, just acceptance. Would you prefer I throw a tantrum?" I asked genuinely. "Break some dishes? Key Brandon's car? What's the alpha move here, Lydia?" She didn't have an answer for that, so she just took her wine and retreated to the bedroom, leaving me alone with my General Tso's chicken and my thoughts. The weekend was surreal. Lydia spent most of it texting Brandon or talking about Brandon or planning her future with Brandon. She mentioned that they were planning a celebration dinner for Monday night after his big announcement. She'd already picked out the restaurant, some overpriced steakhouse where Brandon could make a show of ordering expensive wine and talking about his plans for transforming the company. "You should try to be happy for us," she said Sunday night. "I know this is hard for you, but Brandon really deserves this." "I'm sure he does," I replied, and I meant it. He deserved exactly what was coming to him. Monday morning, I walked into Reynolds' office at 8:30 sharp. He looked up from his computer and raised an eyebrow. "Well, let's do it," I said. He smiled, not a polite corporate smile, but a genuine grin that suggested he enjoyed watching competent people succeed almost as much as I was about to enjoy watching incompetent people fail. "Excellent. The announcement goes out at 9. I went back to my desk, made myself a fresh cup of coffee, and watched the clock tick toward 9 a.m. like I was waiting for fireworks on the 4th of July. Around me, the office buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy. People complained about traffic, discussed their weekends, and prepared themselves for another week of pretending to be productive. Lydia walked past my desk without looking at me, heading toward the project management section. She was wearing her lucky blazer, the navy one she wore to important meetings, and had this barely contained excitement in her step. At 8:58, I opened my email client and waited. At 9 a.m. exactly, the email hit everyone's inbox simultaneously, like a digital meteor strike. And just like that, the fireworks began. There's a specific kind of satisfaction that comes from watching karma work in real time, And let me tell you, it's better than any drug, any dessert, any victory you could imagine. It's the universe finally balancing the scales, except instead of some abstract cosmic justice, you get to watch it happen in a fluorescent-lit office with mediocre coffee and witnesses. Monday morning, 9 a.m. The email notification sound rippled across the office like dominoes falling. That little ding, happening on computer after computer as Titan Edge's company-wide announcement hit every inbox simultaneously. I didn't even need to open mine. I already knew what it said. Instead, I just leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the one I'd requisitioned 3 years ago after throwing out my back fixing a server crisis, and took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The office had that brief moment of silence that happens when everyone's reading the same thing at the same time, like the entire building was holding its breath. Then came the reactions. From the sales section, I heard someone say, "Wait, what?" in a confused voice that suggested their brain was trying to process information that didn't match their expectations. It was probably Jake, one of Brandon's fanboys who'd been practicing his congratulations, boss handshake all weekend. I pulled up the email just to admire it properly. Subject, Leadership Announcement, Director of Strategic Integration. Dear Titan Edge team, we are pleased to announce that Mason Carter has been appointed as our new Director of Strategic Integration, effective immediately. Mason brings 8 years of technical excellence and proven leadership to this role. His deep understanding of our system's architecture and commitment to operational efficiency make him the ideal candidate to bridge our technical and business divisions. Please join us in congratulating Mason on this well-deserved promotion. Best regards, James Reynolds, Senior Vice President. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No flowery language. No corporate buzzword salad. Just straight facts delivered like a professional assassination. Reynolds knew exactly what he was doing. Across the office, I watched the news spread like a virus. People's faces went through this fascinating journey of confusion, surprise, and then, for most of them, understanding. Because here's the thing. Most people at Titan Edge actually knew who did the real work. They'd just assumed, like I had, that real work didn't matter as much as looking good in meetings. My desk phone rang. It was Derek from engineering. "Dude," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Dude. Morning, Derek. You absolute legend. The timing on this is," he broke off, laughing. "Oh man," Brandon just stood up. "He looks like someone told him Santa isn't real." I glanced over toward the sales section. Sure enough, Brandon was on his feet, staring at his computer screen like it had personally betrayed him. His face had gone through several shades of red, settling on something that resembled a tomato having an existential crisis. His perfectly styled hair suddenly looked less executive and more guy who just got hit with a dodgeball. "This is better than the time Peterson accidentally sent that angry email to the entire company instead of just his wife," Derek continued. "I'm getting popcorn. This is a popcorn situation." He hung up, and I watched the office dynamics shift in real time. People were starting to move, grouping up in clusters to discuss this development. Some were heading toward the engineering section, probably to congratulate me. Others were gravitating toward sales, likely to witness Brandon's meltdown firsthand. But the person I was really watching was Lydia. She'd been at her desk in project management, and I saw the exact moment the email registered. She froze, her hand suspended over her keyboard like someone had hit pause on a video. Then she blinked, squinted at her screen, leaned closer like maybe she'd misread it. Her mouth opened slightly, and even from 30 feet away, I could see the color drain from her face like someone had pulled a plug. It was the look of someone realizing they'd bet everything on red, and the wheel had come up black. She turned slowly in her chair, scanning the office until her eyes found me. I gave her a little wave, just a small, friendly gesture, the kind you'd give a neighbor you barely know. Her expression went from shock to something that looked like anger mixed with humiliation and a dash of, "Oh God, what have I done?" Then she stood up, and I knew she was coming over. The office had gone from normal Monday morning energy to something's happening energy, that specific frequency where everyone pretends to work while actually watching the drama unfold. Conversations dropped to whispers. People suddenly found urgent reasons to walk past my desk. Lydia marched over with the purposeful stride of someone who was trying to look confident but was actually falling apart internally. She was still wearing her lucky blazer, which now seemed less lucky and more like a cruel cosmic joke. Mason, she said, her voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. Can we talk? Privately. I'm actually pretty busy right now, I said, gesturing at my computer where I absolutely was not busy. New director responsibilities and all. Maybe schedule something with my assistant. You don't have an assistant. Well, I should probably get one. Add that to the list. I smiled pleasantly. Was there something urgent? Her jaw clenched. Around us, people weren't even pretending to work anymore. This was live theater, and everyone wanted front row seats. How could you do this? She hissed, leaning down so she was closer to my ear. You knew Brandon was going for this position. You knew. And you stole it from him. I leaned back, maintaining my calm demeanor because I'd learned something important over the past few days. Nothing irritates angry people more than refusing to match their energy. I didn't steal anything, Lydia. I was offered a position based on my qualifications and accepted it. That's generally how jobs work. But Brandon can apply for other positions, I interrupted. I hear sales is hiring. Oh wait, he already works in sales. Convenient. You're being petty. I'm being professional, I corrected. You know what would be petty? Announcing this at the restaurant where you two were planning your celebration dinner tonight. But don't worry, I didn't do that. See, not petty at all. Her face went even paler, and I realized she'd forgotten I knew about their dinner plans. Or maybe she just hadn't thought I'd bring it up. Mason, Mrs. Carter, I said, and I made sure to emphasize the name. I really do need to get back to work. Please keep your voice down. We're in a professional environment, and I'm your supervisor now. Let's maintain appropriate workplace decorum. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a knife and served it at Brandon's canceled celebration dinner. Around us, I heard someone, I think it was Priya from Analytics, try and fail to suppress a snort of laughter. Lydia's face went through another color transformation, this time landing somewhere between mortified and furious. You planned this, she whispered. You planned all of this. I planned to do my job well for 8 years, I said. Everything else just kind of worked itself out. Funny how that happens. She opened her mouth to say something else, but before she could, Brandon appeared like a cologne-scented thundercloud. He'd clearly speed-walked over from sales, and his face was still doing that tomato impression. This is bullshit, he announced, loud enough that the entire floor could hear. So much for professional decorum. Reynolds promised me that position. He promised. Did he? I asked innocently. Or did he just let you believe what you wanted to believe? Because there's a difference. You don't even want to lead, Brandon continued, his voice getting louder. You're a systems guy. You're support staff. This position needs someone with vision, with leadership experience, with working knowledge of how the company actually functions, I suggested, with the ability to implement changes without crashing our entire infrastructure, with a proposal that doesn't read like a motivational poster had a baby with a tech startup's failed pitch deck. Several people didn't even try to hide their laughter at that one. Brandon's face somehow got redder. You think you're so smart. I don't think I'm smart, Brandon. I know I'm competent. There's a difference. One of them gets you promoted. The other one gets you. I gestured vaguely at him. Whatever this is. Mr. Mitchells, said a voice from behind him. We all turned to see Reynolds standing there, arms crossed, looking deeply unimpressed. My office. Now. Brandon's expression shifted from angry to worried in about half a second. He shot me a look that probably would have been intimidating if I wasn't currently riding the high of cosmic justice, then followed Reynolds toward the executive wing like a kid being sent to the principal's office. Lydia stood there for another moment, looking between me and the growing crowd of co-workers who were absolutely going to be talking about this for weeks. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to her desk with as much dignity as she could muster, which wasn't much. The office stayed quiet for about 3 more seconds before exploding into conversation. People crowded around my desk offering congratulations, some genuine, some just wanting to be part of the story they'd tell at happy hour later. Derek appeared with actual microwave popcorn. Told you this was a popcorn situation. You're an idiot, I said, but I was grinning. Yeah, but I'm an idiot who just watched you verbally destroy 2 people before 9:30 a.m. That's quality entertainment. He wasn't wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from Reynolds. Well handled. Welcome to leadership. I looked around the office. My office now, really, or at least more mine than it had been an hour ago. People were still buzzing about what had happened. Lydia was at her desk, staring at her screen like it might offer her an escape route. Brandon was presumably getting a reality check from Reynolds. And me? I was just sitting there, drinking my mediocre coffee, thinking about how sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just being better at your job than the people who underestimated you. The thing about winning at work is that eventually, you have to go home. And when home is currently occupied by your soon-to-be ex-wife who just watched her boyfriend's ego get publicly executed, well, that's when the real fun begins. I took my time leaving the office that evening. Not because I was scared. Okay, maybe like 5% scared, but because I wanted to give Lydia plenty of time to work herself into whatever emotional state she was going to be in. Better to let the pressure cooker reach full steam before opening the lid, you know? At least then you know what you're dealing with. I stopped at Giorgio's on the way home, this Italian place that made sandwiches so good they should probably be illegal. Ordered myself a meatball sub with extra provolone, some garlic knots, and a cannoli for dessert, because if I was going to have a confrontation, I was going to have it on a full stomach. The guy behind the counter, Tony, because of course his name was Tony, asked how my day was. Eventful, I said. Good eventful or bad eventful? Yes, I replied, and he laughed like he understood completely. I sat in my car in our driveway for a solid 5 minutes, eating my sandwich and watching our house like it was a building I was about to breach in a hostage situation. The lights were on. Lydia's car was there. Somewhere inside, my wife of 6 years was probably pacing holes in the carpet and rehearsing her tirade. The house we bought 3 years ago was one of those cookie-cutter suburban models that look exactly like every other house on the block except for minor variations in paint color and door styles. Ours was the beige one with the black shutters and the maple tree in the front yard that dropped leaves like it was personally offended by the concept of photosynthesis. We'd been so excited when we bought it, talking about future kids' rooms and hosting Thanksgiving dinners and all those things people say when they think their marriage is going to last forever. Joke's on us, I guess. Or maybe just on me. The jury was still out. I finished my sandwich, grabbed my briefcase and the bag with my garlic knots, and headed for the door. The moment I turned my key in the lock, I could feel the tension radiating from inside like heat from an oven. Lydia was waiting in the living room. Not sitting, not doing anything productive. Just standing there in the middle of our IKEA-furnished living room like she was a final boss, and I'd just entered her arena. She'd changed out of her work clothes into yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her comfort outfit, which she usually wore when she was stressed or sick or about to have a serious conversation. "We need to talk," she said before I'd even fully closed the door. "Sure," I said, heading toward the kitchen with my food. "Let me just put this down. Now, Mason." I stopped, turned around, and really looked at her. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying, which was new. Lydia wasn't much of a crier. She was more of an angry cleaner, the type who'd scrub the kitchen counters aggressively when she was upset. But here she was, mascara smudged and trembling with what I was pretty sure was rage masquerading as hurt feelings. "Okay," I said calmly. "Talk." "How could you do this?" she exploded, and there it was. The pressure cooker had officially blown. "How could you just steal that position from Brandon? You knew how important it was. You knew he was counting on it. You knew we were counting on it." "We," I repeated. "Lydia, there is no we anymore. You made that pretty clear last week when you told me I wasn't alpha enough and announced you were upgrading to Brandon 2.0. That's not." She stopped, regrouped. "You did this to humiliate me, to get back at me." I set my briefcase down carefully, because throwing it would have been satisfying, but ultimately just bad for my laptop. "I did this because I was offered a job I'm qualified for and I accepted it. Your humiliation is a side effect, not the goal. Though I'll admit, it's a pretty entertaining side effect." "You planned this," she yelled, and wow, she was really committed to this narrative. "You knew Brandon was applying. You knew I'd told you about his proposal. And you went behind our backs and stole it." "Behind your backs," I said slowly, "would imply you had some kind of claim to it. Brandon applied for a job. So did several other people, apparently. And the company chose the person they thought was most qualified. That's not theft, Lydia. That's literally how employment works. But you never even mentioned you were interested. Because I didn't tell you every single thought in my head." I walked into the kitchen, suddenly exhausted. We weren't exactly in a sharing place at that point. You'd already mentally moved out and were planning your new life with Captain Cologne. Why would I tell you anything? She followed me, her voice getting higher. Because we're still married. Because you owed me. I owed you. I spun around, and I felt something crack inside me, not in a breaking way, but in a way that releases pressure. I owed you. Let's talk about owing people things, Lydia. Did you owe me honesty before you started whatever the hell was going on with Brandon? Did you owe me a heads up before you decided our marriage was worth less than some sales guy's attention? Did you owe me the courtesy of not using our home as a strategy session to help your boyfriend compete for a job at our shared workplace? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. We weren't. You were feeding him inside information, I said flatly. I saw his proposal, remember? You showed it to me yourself, all proud like you were his campaign manager. Half of that data came from your project reports. Don't insult both of us by pretending this was some innocent work friendship. We're in love, she said, and she actually sounded defiant about it. That's great. I'm genuinely happy you found someone who meets your alpha requirements. But love doesn't entitle you to sabotage my career or act like I'm the villain for being good at my job. You made Brandon look like an idiot in front of the entire company. No, I corrected. Brandon made Brandon look like an idiot. I just happened to be standing nearby when it happened. His proposal was garbage, Lydia. Actual garbage. If the company had implemented his ideas, we would have been facing system failures within a month. Clients would have left. People would have lost their jobs. But sure, I'm the bad guy for being competent. She was crying now, full-on tears streaming down her face. You did this because you're angry. You're punishing me. I'm not punishing you, I said, and I meant it. I'm just not protecting you anymore. There's a difference. What's that supposed to mean? It means that for 6 years, I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I didn't apply for promotions because you said it would be too stressful. I didn't push back when you criticized me because I didn't want to fight. I let you define what an alpha was and accepted that I didn't measure up. But I'm done with that now. I'm done shrinking. You're being cruel, she whispered. I'm being honest, I replied. And if honesty feels cruel, that says more about the lies we were living than it does about me. We stood there in our kitchen, the kitchen where we'd cooked Sunday dinners and hosted friends and argued about whether to get a gas or electric stove. And I realized this was probably the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Maybe ever. You need to move out, I said quietly. You've got a week. This is my house too. And you're welcome to lawyer up and fight for your half in the divorce. But right now, tonight, I need you to start looking for somewhere else to be. I'll take the guest room. You can have the master. But this limbo we're in, it's over. Mason, I'm not doing this anymore, Lydia. The marriage is dead. You killed it when you decided I wasn't enough. Fine, I accept that. But I'm not going to live in this weird purgatory where we pretend to be civil while you're actively rooting for me to fail so your boyfriend can succeed. That's not what I was doing. That's exactly what you were doing, I said tiredly. And honestly, I don't even blame you that much. You picked your team. I get it. But now you have to live with the fact that your team lost, and that's not my problem to fix. She stared at me like I was a stranger, which was fair because I barely recognized myself either. This version of Mason, the one who set boundaries and meant them, was new to both of us. You've changed, she said, and it sounded like an accusation. Yeah, I agreed. I have. Turns out being called not an alpha is either a devastating insult or a wake-up call, depending on how you take it. I chose wake-up call. You're cold, she said, her voice shaking. When did you become so cold? I looked at her, really looked at her, this woman I'd loved, married, built a life with, and then watched walk away because I didn't fit her revised expectations. I'm not cold, Lydia, I said softly. I'm just done being warm in an icebox. Then I grabbed my garlic knots, walked to the guest room, and closed the door. Behind it, I heard her crying. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel guilty about it. If you've never experienced the particular flavor of awkwardness that comes from running a meeting with your wife and her boyfriend both in the room, let me tell you, it's like hosting Thanksgiving dinner with your family and your family's sworn enemies. Except everyone has to pretend they're professionals and nobody's allowed to throw mashed potatoes. My first official meeting as Director of Strategic Integration was scheduled for Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. in Conference Room B, which was the second largest conference room and had windows that actually opened, making it the crown jewel of tight-edged meeting spaces. I'd spent Tuesday doing the usual new director stuff, meeting with department heads, reviewing budgets, nodding thoughtfully while HR explained policies I already knew, and generally pretending I hadn't just emotionally demolished my wife 2 nights prior. The meeting agenda was straightforward. Introduce my vision for the role, hear presentations from key stakeholders about their department's integration needs, and establish a framework for moving forward. Standard corporate stuff. The kind of meeting that normally would have put half the room to sleep by the 15-minute mark. Except this wasn't going to be a normal meeting, because Brandon had apparently decided that this was his chance at redemption. I arrived early because that's what responsible people do, and also because I wanted to claim the power seat at the head of the table before anyone else could. The conference room had that generic corporate aesthetic: gray carpet, white walls, a table that could seat 12 uncomfortably or 8 with adequate elbow room, and a projector screen that worked about 70% of the time. There was a whiteboard covered in someone's forgotten brainstorming session about Q3 optimization strategies, and a sad plant in the corner that was either plastic or had transcended the need for photosynthesis. I set up my laptop, pulled up my notes, and waited. People started filtering in around 9:55. Priya from Analytics came in first, gave me a supportive smile, and took a seat to my right. She was followed by Marcus from IT Infrastructure, Janet from Client Relations, and a few others whose positions I knew, but whose personal dramas I'd successfully avoided until now. Lydia walked in at 9:58, wearing her professional armor, a sharp blazer, minimal jewelry, and an expression that said she'd rather be literally anywhere else. She didn't look at me, just found a seat near the middle of the table, pulled out her tablet, and started scrolling through something with intense focus that was definitely fake. Then, at exactly 10 a.m., because of course he'd make an entrance, Brandon walked in. The man had somehow managed to look even more like a cologne advertisement than usual. His suit was so perfectly tailored it probably had its own LinkedIn profile. His hair was styled with enough product to survive a Category 5 hurricane. And he was carrying a leather portfolio that looked like it cost more than my first car, which was a 1998 Honda Civic with a broken AC and a passenger door that only opened from the outside. "Morning, everyone," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who thinks every room improves when they enter it. "Mason, congrats on the new role." He said it with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile people give at funerals when they're trying to be polite but are mostly just uncomfortable. "Thanks, Brandon," I replied evenly. "Glad you could make it." He took a seat directly across from me, which was a power move if I'd ever seen one. The alpha positioning himself to challenge the new pack leader. I almost laughed, but managed to keep it internal. "All right," I said, checking the clock. "Let's get started. Thanks everyone for being here. As you know, I'm stepping into this director role with the goal of improving how our departments work together. We've got great people doing great work, but we've got inefficiencies that are costing us time, money, and occasionally our sanity." A few people chuckled. Brandon's smile got tighter. "I want to hear from each of you about the biggest integration challenges you're facing, and then we'll prioritize what to tackle first. Let's keep it practical, specific, and honest. This isn't a feel-good session. I want real problems so we can find real solutions." I went around the table, and people opened up in ways they probably hadn't in previous meetings. Marcus talked about how the sales team kept promising features to clients that the technical team couldn't deliver on existing timelines. Janet mentioned communication gaps that left client relations scrambling to manage expectations. Priya pointed out data silos that made accurate analysis nearly impossible. And through it all, Brandon sat there with this expression like he was watching children fumble through explanations that he, the enlightened one, could fix with a snap of his fingers. Finally, he raised his hand. Actually raised his hand like we were in elementary school. "Yes, Brandon," I said. "I've actually prepared a presentation," he announced, pulling out a flash drive like it was Excalibur. "I think it addresses a lot of what people are talking about. It's called the Alpha Project Plan, a comprehensive restructuring initiative that would solve most of these integration issues." Of course it was called the Alpha Project Plan. Of course it was. "Sure," I said. "Let's see it." He practically bounded up to the projector, plugged in his drive, and within seconds we were looking at a title slide that featured the words Alpha Project Plan in letters so large and bold they were practically screaming. The subtitle read, "A Revolutionary Approach to Corporate Synergy." There was also a stock photo of a lion for some reason. The presentation that followed was exactly what I'd expected, a masterclass in saying nothing with maximum confidence. Slide after slide of buzzwords, vague promises, and graphs that looked impressive until you realized they weren't actually measuring anything specific. We need to leverage our core competencies, Brandon said, gesturing at a slide that showed interconnected circles labeled with words like innovation and excellence. By creating cross-functional synergy pods, we can disrupt our own paradigm before the market disrupts it for us. I watched people's faces around the table. Some looked confused. Others looked like they were trying really hard to seem impressed. Lydia was nodding along like Brandon was delivering the Gettysburg Address. Each synergy pod, he continued, clicking to another slide, would operate with agile methodology, utilizing AI-driven decision matrices to optimize workflow velocity. That sentence contained approximately zero actual information, but he delivered it like he'd just solved world hunger. He went on like this for 10 minutes, talking about empowerment ecosystems and strategic disruption frameworks and next-generation integration protocols. It was like watching someone try to build a house using only motivational quotes and hand gestures. Finally, he got to his big finale, a timeline showing how we could implement this entire transformation in 6 months. And that, he said, standing proudly next to his lion slide, is how we become the alpha company in our sector. There was a moment of silence. A few people clapped politely. Lydia clapped enthusiastically. Brandon looked at me expectantly, waiting for praise or at least acknowledgement of his genius. I let the silence hang for just a few seconds longer than comfortable. "Thanks, Brandon," I said. "That was certainly comprehensive. I have a quick question, though." "Sure," he said, still riding high on his own presentation fumes. "Your implementation plan shows a complete system migration happening in month 3. Did you factor in our query limit restrictions?" His confident expression flickered. "Query limits? Yeah. Our current infrastructure handles about 15,000 queries per second at peak times. Your plan, based on these slides, would require us to process at least triple that volume during the migration phase alone. So I'm curious how you plan to handle that without, crashing our entire system." Blank stare. The room was so quiet I could hear the sad plant in the corner questioning its life choices. The technical team would handle those details," he said, recovering slightly. "Right, but you're proposing a 6-month timeline. The technical team. Marcus, you want to weigh in here? How long would it take to upgrade our infrastructure to handle that kind of load?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Conservatively? 18 months. Maybe 2 years if we want to do it without catastrophic risk. But with the right pressure and prioritization," Brandon started. "You can't pressure physics, Brandon," I said, pulling up a data sheet on my laptop and projecting it on the screen. "These are our actual system specs. Your plan would crash our servers within an hour of implementation. We'd lose client data, violate about 15 different compliance regulations, and probably end up in legal proceedings that would make the company newsletter very interesting reading." The room had shifted from politely interested to deeply uncomfortable. A few people were looking down at their notes. Lydia's face had gone pale. "And this section here," I continued, because apparently I was in a demolition mood, "where you suggest using AI to automate the integration process." Which AI exactly? Because we don't have AI integration tools. We'd have to develop or purchase them, which isn't in the budget and would take. I looked at Priya. "At least a year to implement properly," she supplied. "Right? A year." I smiled at Brandon. "So really interesting ideas here. Very inspirational. But maybe let's pause this before we accidentally bankrupt the company." "Sound good." Brandon's face had gone through several colors and settled on a shade that reminded me of undercooked chicken. This is just a preliminary framework," he managed. "Of course," I said smoothly. "And we appreciate the enthusiasm. But moving forward, let's make sure our plans are grounded in actual capability rather than theoretical possibility." "Lydia," I turned to my wife, who looked like she wanted to dissolve into the carpet. "Let's redirect your project team to support the Phoenix migration instead. That's actually feasible and would solve about 40% of our current integration issues." She nodded mutely. "All right," I said, checking the clock. "That's probably enough for today. Thanks everyone for your input. Brandon, appreciate you putting that together. Maybe run it by the technical team next time before presenting. Just a thought." The meeting dissolved, people gathering their things with the kind of energy that suggested they couldn't wait to gossip about what just happened. Brandon practically fled the room, his leather portfolio clutched like a shield. Lydia left without looking at me. Priya lingered. That was brutal. That was necessary, I corrected. Also brutal, she grinned. But yeah, necessary. His plan would have been a disaster. I know. You enjoying this? I thought about it. More than I probably should. She laughed and headed out, leaving me alone in conference room B with my laptop, my notes, and the profound satisfaction of watching incompetence meet consequences in real time. If you've never been the subject of office gossip, let me tell you, it's like being a celebrity except instead of paparazzi, you've got Susan from accounting whispering about you by the coffee machine. And instead of tabloid headlines, you've got Slack messages that people think are private, but definitely aren't. The day after my first staff meeting, the Titan Edge office was buzzing harder than a wasp's nest that someone had poked with a stick. And I was the stick. Or maybe I was the poker. Either way, people had opinions, and they weren't being shy about sharing them. I first noticed it when I walked into the break room around 10 a.m. to refill my coffee. The conversation at the table near the window, featuring 3 people from sales whose names I should probably know but didn't, died the instant I entered, like someone had hit a mute button on reality. They all suddenly became very interested in their phones, their coffee cups, the fascinating texture of the ceiling tiles. Morning, I said cheerfully, because making awkward people more awkward is one of life's simple pleasures. A chorus of mumbled mornings followed me to the coffee maker, which was dispensing its usual sludge that technically qualified as coffee in the same way that Velveeta technically qualifies as cheese. I poured myself a cup, added enough creamer to make it a different color, and headed back out. The moment the door closed behind me, the conversation resumed at twice the volume. Derek caught up with me in the hallway. Dude, you're like the only thing anyone's talking about. You've basically become Titan Ed's version of a reality TV show. Great. Do I at least get paid in brand deals and Instagram followers? You get paid in schadenfreude and respect, he said. Which, honestly, might be better. You know Brandon's been going around telling people you're on a power trip. Am I on a power trip? I asked. Because if I am, I want to make sure I'm doing it right. Should I get a monocle? Start referring to myself in the third person? Please don't, Derek laughed. But yeah, he's trying to rally the troops. Says you're too technical to understand leadership, that you don't have the people skills for the role, that you humiliated him on purpose in that meeting. I mean, I definitely humiliated him, I admitted. But the on purpose part is debatable. If his plan wasn't hot garbage, there would have been nothing to humiliate. Preaching to the choir, man. Everyone on the technical side thinks you're a hero. Sales department, though. He made a face. They're less enthusiastic. That made sense. Brandon was their guy, their champion, the poster child for everything sales thought leadership should look like. Loud, confident, and completely unburdened by things like facts or feasibility. But here's the thing about corporate politics that Brandon never quite grasped. At the end of the day, companies care about results more than they care about personalities. You can be the most charismatic person in the building, but if you can't actually deliver, eventually someone's going to notice. And I could deliver. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into actually doing the job instead of just looking like I was doing the job. I met with every department head individually, not to impress them with buzzwords or grand visions, but to actually understand what was broken and how to fix it. I spent hours reviewing system architectures, client contracts, workflow bottlenecks. I rebuilt communication protocols between departments that had been operating like hostile nations for years. The Phoenix Migration Project, the one I'd redirected Lydia's team to, was a perfect example. It had been stalled for 6 months because nobody could agree on priorities or timelines. I spent a day mapping out dependencies, another day negotiating resources, and by the end of the week, we had a plan that everyone could actually work with. 2 weeks in, we hit our first major milestone ahead of schedule. The client, a financial services company that had been threatening to leave because our integration was supposedly inadequate, sent an email praising the improvements. Reynolds forwarded it to the entire executive team with a note that said simply, "This is what good leadership looks like." I didn't forward it to Brandon, but I didn't have to. Office gossip travels faster than light, and definitely faster than Brandon's ability to process his declining relevance. Meanwhile, Lydia was running her own campaign, though hers was more subtle than Brandon's scorched earth approach. She didn't openly criticize me. That would have been too obvious and too risky given that I was technically her superior now. But she had this way of making comments that planted seeds of doubt. Mason's very focused on the technical details. I heard her tell someone in project management. Sometimes I worry he loses sight of the people side of things. Or, he's brilliant with systems, obviously, but leadership requires more than just technical knowledge. Or my personal favorite, overheard in the bathroom hallway. I'm just concerned he might be making decisions based on personal feelings rather than what's best for the company. The irony of that last one was so thick you could have served it as soup. But here's what Lydia didn't account for. People aren't stupid. They could see that under my leadership, things were actually improving. Deadlines were being met. Interdepartmental communication was less like warfare and more like actual collaboration. Problems were getting solved instead of just getting talked about in meetings that spawned more meetings. And Brandon's Grand Alpha project plan? After I'd torn it apart in the conference room, someone, I suspect Reynolds but can't prove it, had it independently reviewed by an external consulting firm. Their assessment came back with language like fundamentally flawed, catastrophically risky, and my favorite, appears to prioritize style over substance to a degree that borders on professional negligence. That report made the rounds through upper management, and suddenly Brandon's reputation as a rising star started looking more like a falling meteor. The company also ran the numbers on what would have happened if we'd implemented his plan. Between the system crashes, potential data breaches, client losses, and legal exposure, we would have been looking at somewhere between $8 and $12 million in damages. $12 million. Reynolds mentioned this to me in passing one afternoon, adding, "So by not being an idiot, you basically saved the company enough money to fund the next 3 years of infrastructure upgrades. Good work." "Just doing my job," I said. "That's the thing, Mason. You actually are. Novel concept around here lately." I was in the cafeteria on a Friday afternoon, enjoying what Titan Edge generously called a gourmet sandwich, but which was actually just turkey, cheese, and existential disappointment on wheat bread, when Priya slid into the seat across from me. "You know what people are calling you?" she asked without preamble. "The guy who ruined Brandon's life?" "I mean, yes, but also no." She grinned. "Silent Thunder." I stopped mid-chew. "Silent Thunder?" "Yeah, because you don't make a lot of noise, but when you hit hard. Derek started it, but it's caught on. Even people in other departments are using it." "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard," I said. "It's also kind of badass," she pointed out. "Better than what they called the last director. People called him the moisturizer because he was always trying to smooth things over without actually fixing anything. That's actually pretty accurate for corporate management in general, right? But you're different. You actually solve problems instead of just managing perceptions of problems. It's refreshing. Also kind of scary for people who've built careers on managing perceptions." I thought about Brandon, about Lydia, about all the people in this building who'd mastered the art of looking productive without being productive. "You think I'm making enemies?" "Oh, definitely," Priya said cheerfully. "But you're also making allies. The people who actually give a damn about doing good work, they love you. The people who've been coasting on charisma and PowerPoint skills, they're terrified." Which is exactly how it should be. Silent Thunder. I repeated, testing it out. I don't know whether to be flattered or concerned. Be both. It's more interesting that way. That evening, I was packing up my desk when I saw Brandon leaving early, carrying a box with some of his personal items from his desk. Not all of them. Not yet, but enough that it looked like someone preparing for an inevitable conclusion. He saw me watching and tried to straighten up, tried to look confident. But the effect was ruined by the fact that his box contained a participation trophy from a sales competition and a framed motivational poster that said, "Hustle harder." Lydia was already gone. She'd been leaving early a lot lately, and I had a feeling those early departures involved apartment hunting and conversations with divorce lawyers. We'd barely spoken since the night I told her to move out, communicating mainly through passive-aggressive notes about whose turn it was to take out the trash and whether the thermostat setting was reasonable. I locked my office. My actual office now, with a door and a window and a plant that I was determined to keep alive unlike the sad specimen in Conference Room B, and headed to my car. On my phone was a message from Reynolds. "Board meeting next month." They want to hear about integration improvements. You're presenting. No pressure. I smiled. Pressure was just another word for opportunity. And opportunity was what I'd been quietly building while everyone else was busy gossiping. Silent thunder. I could work with that. You know that feeling when things are going too well, and you just know the universe is about to throw a wrench into the machinery? That's where I was about 3 weeks into my new role as director. Projects were humming along, deadlines were being met, and I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, I'd actually earned this Silent Thunder nickname instead of it being an ironic commentary on my eventual failure. That's when my monitoring system started having a stroke. It was a Tuesday morning, because bad things always happen on Tuesdays, never Mondays when you're expecting them. And I was reviewing the overnight system logs with my first cup of coffee, which is the kind of thrilling activity that makes people understand why I'm so fun at parties. The logs were showing some weird activity in one of our legacy integration modules. Nothing catastrophic, just odd. Little inconsistencies that didn't make sense, like finding your furniture moved 3 inches to the left and not knowing whether you're crazy or if something genuinely happened. The module in question was one I'd built about 4 years ago, a data synchronization tool that handled client information transfers between our main database and our backup systems. It wasn't sexy work, but it was critical. If it failed, we'd lose the ability to recover client data in an emergency, which would violate about 17 different compliance regulations and probably get us sued into the next dimension. I pulled up the code repository to check if anyone had made legitimate updates. Nothing. No approved changes, no documentation, no tickets in our project management system. Just my original code sitting there like it had been for years. Except it hadn't been. I ran a comparison between the current version and the last verified backup. There were changes. Small ones, subtle ones. The kind that someone who didn't really understand the system might make thinking they were being clever. Someone had modified the error handling protocols. Specifically, they'd added a loop that would trigger if the system encountered certain data types, the kind we processed about 3,000 times a day. The loop would cause the system to keep trying to process the same data over and over, exponentially increasing server load until everything crashed like a drunk driver hitting a telephone pole. It was sabotage. Clumsy, obvious in hindsight sabotage, but sabotage nonetheless. Son of a bitch, I muttered, setting down my coffee. My first instinct was to fix it immediately, muscle memory from years of being the guy who solved problems instead of creating them. But then I stopped, hand hovering over my keyboard, and thought about it differently. If someone had deliberately broken this system, they probably wanted it to fail spectacularly. And if they wanted it to fail spectacularly, they probably wanted me to look incompetent. Which meant fixing it quietly would solve the immediate problem, but not the bigger issue of someone actively trying to sabotage my work. I needed receipts. I called down to IT security, specifically to a guy named Kevin who handled our cybersecurity monitoring. Kevin was one of those people who looked like he'd never seen sunlight. Pale, perpetually tired, sustained entirely by energy drinks and the thrill of catching people doing stupid things on company systems. Kevin, it's Mason Carter. I need you to pull some access logs for me. What are we looking for? Kevin's voice had that energy that suggested he was already 3 Red Bulls deep into his morning. System access for the legacy integration module. Specifically, I need to know who accessed the code repository between Friday evening and Monday morning. You think someone's been messing with your stuff? He sounded almost excited, like I just told him it was Christmas. I think someone's been doing something they shouldn't have been doing, and I'd like to know who before I jump to conclusions. Give me 10 minutes. It took him 7. Okay, this is interesting, Kevin said when he called back. Your module was accessed Saturday night at 10:47 p.m. Single login, lasted about 43 minutes. Whose login? Brandon Mitchell's. Sales department. I sat back in my chair, and I swear I could feel the universe laughing at me. Of course it was Brandon. Of course the guy whose ego I'd publicly demolished would try something this stupid and predictable. You're absolutely sure? I asked. I mean, it was his credentials, his workstation, and we've got security camera footage of someone at his desk at that time. Want me to pull the video? Yeah, pull everything. Timestamps, IP addresses, the video footage, the change logs. I need a complete evidence package. You going to HR with this? Eventually. First, I'm going to make absolutely sure I'm not missing anything. I want this airtight. Kevin sent over the files within the hour, and I spent the rest of the morning building a case that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. The security footage showed Brandon clear as day, sitting at his desk in an otherwise empty office, typing away with the focused intensity of someone who thought they were being brilliant. The access logs showed him navigating through the code repository, slowly, like someone who didn't really understand what they were looking at, but had been given enough information to find the right file. The change timestamps matched perfectly with when he was at his desk, and the modifications themselves had digital fingerprints that pointed directly to his workstation. It was almost insulting how sloppy it was, like watching someone rob a bank while wearing a name tag and leaving their driver's license at the scene. I also found something else interesting. About 2 weeks before this, there had been another access attempt to the same module from a project management workstation. It hadn't made any changes, just viewed the code. That login belonged to Lydia, so she'd scouted it out, probably explained to Brandon where to look and what to change, and then he'd gone in and done the actual damage. A real partnership built on love, trust, and corporate sabotage. How romantic. I saved everything to an encrypted folder, made 3 backup copies because I'm not an idiot, and then walked down to HR. Jennifer Martinez ran our HR department with an efficiency that suggested she'd seen every possible variation of workplace drama and had stopped being surprised somewhere around 2015. She looked up when I entered, took one look at my face, and sighed. "What happened?" "Someone tried to sabotage one of my systems," I said, closing her office door. "I have evidence. A lot of evidence. And it's going to make things complicated." "How complicated?" "Brandon Mitchell's complicated. Possibly Lydia Carter complicated." Jennifer's expression shifted from professional concern to genuine interest. "Your wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife." "Yeah. Okay," she said, pulling out a notepad. "Show me what you've got." I walked her through everything. The code changes, the access logs, the security footage, the prior reconnaissance from Lydia's workstation. Jennifer took notes, asked pointed questions, and occasionally made sounds that suggested she was equal parts impressed by my thoroughness and appalled by Brandon's stupidity. "This is pretty damning," she said finally. "You understand if we investigate this, it's going to blow up spectacularly?" "I'm aware. But if I don't report it and something fails because of his changes, we're looking at data breaches, compliance violations, and lawsuits. I'd rather deal with office drama than federal investigations." "Fair point." She closed her notepad. "I'll need to loop in Mr. Reynolds and our legal team. Don't confront Brandon about this. Don't mention it to anyone. Let us handle the investigation properly. Already planned on it. And Mason?" She looked at me seriously. "This could get ugly. Your wife is implicated. That's going to create HR nightmares." "She stopped being my problem the day she told me I wasn't alpha enough," I said. "Whatever consequences come from this, they earned them." Jennifer nodded slowly. "All right, give me 24 hours. We'll move fast on this." I left her office feeling a weird mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. Part of me, the petty part that I was learning to embrace, was thrilled that Brandon had been stupid enough to leave such an obvious trail. But another part, the part that still remembered being married to Lydia and working alongside these people, felt tired of all the drama. I went back to my office, fixed the sabotage code in about 10 minutes, and implemented additional security protocols to prevent similar access in the future. Then I sat at my desk and waited for the hammer to fall. It didn't take long. By Wednesday morning, security was pulling Brandon in for questioning. By Wednesday afternoon, Reynolds had seen the evidence. By Wednesday evening, Lydia was being asked to explain her access logs. And me? I was just sitting in my office, drinking mediocre coffee, and watching karma do what karma does best. Silent thunder, indeed. There's a specific kind of silence that happens right before someone's career ends, and it's different from regular silence. It's heavier, denser, like the air pressure drops, and everyone can feel the storm coming, but nobody wants to be the first to acknowledge it. That was Thursday morning at Titan Edge. Brandon was called into a conference room at 9 a.m. Not conference room B where we held staff meetings, but one of the small ones on the executive floor. The kind of room where careers go to die and severance packages get negotiated. I watched him walk past my office, and for the first time since I'd known him, he wasn't strutting. He was just walking like a normal person who knew something bad was about to happen. He had his leather portfolio with him, which seemed almost sad, like bringing a fancy briefcase to your own execution. Reynolds was already in there, along with Jennifer from HR and Paula Hendricks, our legal counsel. Paula was a woman in her 60s who'd seen every corporate disaster imaginable and had the emotional range of a particularly stern grandmother. If Paula was involved, you were screwed. I didn't attend the meeting, didn't need to. I provided my evidence, and now it was their job to handle the consequences. Instead, I focused on actual work, reviewing the upcoming board presentation and trying not to obsessively check the clock. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Brandon emerged, he looked like someone had physically deflated him. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped, and he was carrying a cardboard box, the universal symbol of corporate death. They'd let him pack up his desk under supervision, which meant they wanted him gone immediately. I watched from my office as he made the walk of shame through the building. People pretended not to stare, but everyone was watching. Brandon Mitchells, the guy who'd been so sure he was destined for greatness, was now shuffling toward the exit with a box containing his participation trophies, his motivational posters, and whatever remained of his dignity. He saw me watching. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw something in his expression, not anger, not even embarrassment. Just this hollow recognition that he'd played a stupid game and won a stupid prize. I didn't gloat, didn't smile, just nodded slightly, acknowledging his existence one last time before he walked out of Titan Edge and presumably out of my life forever. Derek appeared in my doorway about 10 minutes later. Holy shit. Yeah. Security escorted him out. Like, actual security. I heard he tried to deny everything until they showed him the video footage, and then he just broke. What did he say? According to Sarah in HR, who heard it from Kevin who was monitoring the security feeds, he tried to claim he was just checking the system for vulnerabilities and accidentally made changes. Derek snorted, like anyone was buying that. And legally? They're not pressing criminal charges because the damage was caught before it caused problems. But he signed an NDA, agreed to forfeit his remaining PTO, and is basically persona non grata in the industry now. Reynolds made it clear he'd personally tank any future job references. That seemed fair. Harsh, but fair. What about Lydia? I asked because I had to know. Derek's expression shifted to uncomfortable. She's meeting with HR right now. They can't prove she directly helped him sabotage anything. Her access was just viewing, not modifying. But they're moving her to legacy accounts. Legacy accounts. The department where old projects went to slowly die of neglect and where employees went when the company wanted them to quit without actually firing them. It was corporate purgatory, technically still employed, but with zero growth potential and the kind of work that made people update their resumes during lunch breaks. That's brutal, I said. She earned it, Derek replied. She was feeding company data to her boyfriend to help him compete for your job. Maybe she didn't directly sabotage the code, but she definitely helped set it up. He was right. I knew he was right. But there was still this weird pang of something. Not quite guilt, not quite sadness. Maybe just the recognition that the woman I'd spent 6 years of my life with was now facing professional consequences for choosing the wrong ally. Anyway, Derek continued, clearly sensing my mood. The engineering team wants to take you out for drinks tomorrow to celebrate. You in? Celebrate what? Someone losing their job. Celebrate competence winning over bullshit, he corrected. That's rare enough to deserve drinks. I smiled despite myself. Yeah, okay. I'm in. After Derek left, I sat at my desk and looked out my window at the parking lot below. Brandon's car was already gone. That ridiculous BMW he'd probably leased to look successful. Lydia's car was still there, and I wondered what she was thinking right now, sitting in HR, watching her career trajectory plummet because she'd bet on the wrong horse. My phone buzzed with a message from Reynolds. Investigation concluded. Your systems are secure. Well done. I typed back, just doing my job. His response came immediately. That's what makes you good at it. I leaned back in my chair, sipped my coffee, and realized something. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied or any of the things I'd expected to feel watching my enemies fall. I just felt tired and ready to move forward. 3 months later, I was standing in front of the Titan Edge board of directors, presenting our quarterly integration results and thinking about how weird life is. The presentation was going well. Actually well, not fake it till you make it well. Client satisfaction was up 32%. System efficiency had improved by 40%. Interdepartmental communication issues had dropped by half. We'd launched 2 major projects successfully, both under budget and ahead of schedule. The numbers spoke for themselves, which was good because I wasn't exactly a naturally gifted public speaker. The Phoenix migration has exceeded all projected outcomes, I said, clicking to a slide that showed actual data instead of motivational stock photos. We've reduced processing time by 60% while improving data accuracy. Our client retention rate is the highest it's been in 4 years. The board members nodded, looking genuinely impressed rather than politely bored. Reynolds, sitting at the side of the room, gave me a subtle thumbs up. After the presentation, the board chair, a woman named Catherine who'd built her own tech company from scratch before retiring to torture other executives with her high standards, pulled me aside. That was solid work, Mason. Reynolds tells me you've transformed the department culture. Just removed some inefficiencies, I said. She smiled knowingly. I heard about those inefficiencies. The Brandon situation made it to the board level. I'm sure it did. Word's gotten around the industry, actually. He's basically unemployable now. Last I heard, he was trying to start some kind of consulting business. She said consulting business, the way you'd say pyramid scheme. His LinkedIn profile is aspirational. I'd looked at his LinkedIn once, out of morbid curiosity. His profile now described him as an independent strategic advisor and thought leader in disruptive innovation. Translation: unemployed and desperate. His posts were all recycled motivational quotes and vague observations about leadership that got about 3 likes each, probably from his mom and 2 former colleagues who felt bad for him. I didn't feel bad for him. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. What about your wife? Catherine asked, and I appreciated that she was direct enough to just ask. Ex-wife, as of last month. Divorce finalized. She quit Titan Edge about 6 weeks ago. Where'd she end up? No idea, I said honestly. Last I heard, she moved in with her sister and started some kind of wellness tea business online. We don't keep in touch. That was an understatement. Lydia had moved out 2 days after being reassigned to legacy accounts, taking her half of the furniture and leaving behind a note that said she hoped I was happy with myself. I was, actually, but probably not in the way she meant it. The divorce had been surprisingly clean. We didn't have kids, our assets were straightforward, and neither of us wanted to drag things out. She got her car, half the savings, and the wedding china we'd never used. I got the house, my sanity, and the cat, though Mr. Whiskers had always liked me better anyway. Her wellness tea business appeared to be one of those multi-level marketing things based on the promotional posts I'd seen before blocking her on social media. She was posting a lot about female entrepreneurship and finding your authentic self and breaking free from toxic environments. Good for her, I guess. Everyone needs a narrative. The office dynamics had shifted completely. With Brandon gone and Lydia in the rearview mirror, the workplace actually felt functional. People focused on work instead of politics. Meetings had agendas and outcomes instead of just being performance art. The sales department had brought in someone new, a woman named Patricia who actually understood that client relationships were built on delivering results, not expensive lunches and cologne. My team respected me, not because I was loud or intimidating, but because I knew what I was doing and didn't ask them to do anything I wouldn't do myself. Novel concept, apparently. Derek had been right about the Silent Thunder nickname. It stuck, though people mostly used it as a joke now. Someone had even made me a coffee mug with thunder clouds on it as a gag gift. I used it every day. Sometimes I thought back to that conversation with Lydia, the one where she told me I wasn't an alpha. The one that had felt like the end of my world, but turned out to be just the end of a chapter I'd outgrown. She'd wanted an alpha, someone loud, commanding, decisive, ambitious. Someone who looked like a leader in the way TV and movies told us leaders should look. Someone like Brandon, with his designer suits and his PowerPoint presentations and his complete lack of substance. But here's what Lydia never understood. Real alphas don't need to announce themselves. They don't need to be the loudest voice in the room or the most visible presence in the office. They don't lead through intimidation or charisma or motivational speeches. They lead by being so damn good at what they do that everyone else naturally falls in line behind them. They rebuild broken systems. They solve actual problems. They make the people around them better through competence, not inspiration. And when someone tries to tear them down, they don't roar and rage and make a scene. They just quietly gather evidence, let consequences happen naturally, and keep doing excellent work while their enemies self-destruct. That evening, I drove home to my house, just mine now, and sat on my couch with Mr. Whiskers purring on my lap. I had a beer, some leftover pizza, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd earned everything I had. Lydia had been right about one thing. She needed an alpha. She just couldn't recognize one when he was sitting right in front of her. Because real alphas don't roar. They rebuild. They refocus. They rise. Quietly. And when they do, the whole world finally hears the silence.